This was before the time where I insisted on putting in canonical names for all of my characters, so I'm gonna go ahead and fit as much of Brandon in here as we can. All right, let's register. These controls are really rough. I don't know who decided that select should move between the menu options. See, this is actually what I love about this game is you start out, you've got your shield, you don't even have a sword, you don't have any items. It really communicates immediately that it's about exploration. And it's like, it differs pretty dramatically from other games of the era. Well, it's an action game still, right? Like you're gonna get a sword and fight dudes and go on an adventure and that kind of stuff. So it's like it's typical in that sense, but it's atypical in the sense that like what the game is about is not so immediately obvious. Of course, if you walk into that very, very first cave, you'll get your sword and we'll go on our adventure. But yeah, this is one of my favorite games of all time. I kind of discovered it late. It came out in '85, which was the same year that I was born. So I actually didn't. I didn't catch the wave of when like kids would have been talking about Zelda in school and working through the puzzles and all that kind of stuff. I came across it much later. I remember I loved NES games because they were a little bit old by the time I got into games, and so I could go to garage sales and afford them on my allowance. I think the first time I played Zelda was actually at a friend's house. Anytime a friend had a console, I wanted to just go through all of their games and see what they were like and find the ones that I liked. And I knew immediately that this one was my speed. Just because there's so much weird stuff in it. It's like, you never know what's gonna be at the end of one of these caves or how the enemies are gonna work or any of that kind of stuff. And it kind of stuck with me. Like, I remember sort of shortly after the era where I would have played this game, I was cobbling together computer parts because I was really getting into programming. And one of the very first things that I found that was fun to do was when we got an internet connection was to download ROMs online and play them in an emulator. And this was a great game to play in an emulator because I had no idea what to do when I was a kid when I was playing this for the first time. It's just too hard. There are too many secrets. The difficulty ramp is too large. Like I just wasn't going to get far unless I could start using some cheating tools to get through it. And at the time, it was just cheating, right? It was like sort of the save states and the things that would let you plug in Game Genie codes into the emulators and all that kind of stuff. See, I'm still not good at this game. But it kind of progressed from there as I got more and more interested in programming, and I spent time actually using the ROM tools to reverse engineer it and really kind of dig in and figure out how the game worked and how it was put together in terms of the art and puzzle design and all that kind of stuff. And so it was this game that was sort of formative for me, not because it was just a game that I liked a lot when I was a kid, but because it was this catalyst for me developing this interest in this stuff that has been important to me in my entire life. And this game in particular, like hack and slash, has a lot of Zelda in it. It wears its inspiration on its sleeves, but it's not really the franchise so much as this game specifically, because of those experiences playing it in an emulator. And this game is way better suited to that kind of interaction and exploration than the later ones, because the later ones are like better designed and like hint better at the direction you need to go to solve the next puzzle, and they're just like they're just less open and arcane. And how am I even going to get to the first dungeon? This is terrible. So it's just sort of that essence of this game being a game about mysteries and exploration and secrets and all that kind of stuff is the thing that's important to me about it. And it's kind of interesting because that legacy doesn't really seem to have carried forward into the other games. Maybe Zelda 2 a little bit, but the franchise really kind of hit its stride and became what it has been since with Link to the Past. And the narrative is pushed forward a lot more. The kind of like drama and epic fantasy of it is a lot more pronounced than it is in this game. And it's kind of interesting because I like all of those games, but I kind of wish the legacy had more to do with this one, and just how sort of weird and esoteric it is. And I feel like you get little tastes of it in the rest of the franchise. Like, you know, Majora's Mask is like a wildly experimental game that seems like an opportunity for Miyamoto to play with some really strange stuff. Or Link's Awakening on the Game Boy is really funny and plays with the tropes of this style of game. This one feels like a kind of anomaly in a way. It's interesting that the rest of the Zelda games descend from it. But because I loved this game so much and I cared so much about how it worked, I spent a lot of time kind of reading everything that I could about its development. And it's really interesting because the things that, you know, if you ask somebody what Zelda is about, they're like, oh, well, you're this boy named Link who's trying to fight this evil wizard and save the princess. But that doesn't really have any correspondence with what Miyamoto said his inspirations were when he was designing it. Miyamoto talks a lot in sort of early press that you can find about the game about, you know, experiences in his childhood where he'd run through the hills in Kyoto, like, you know, exploring without a map and not knowing where anything is, and, you know, a particularly impactful moment when he came across the entrance to a cave and he had to work up the bravery to actually descend into it and explore it. And like that sort of stuff was at the heart of the game for him and what the game was about. And so it seems like it's way less about the adventuring for the sake of, you know, defeating a great evil and more about the exploration and adventure part of it, which is the stuff that really speaks to me. And there's this quote. I'm not going to be able to recite it perfectly, but it's something to the extent of, like, with Zelda, really what he wanted to make was a garden that people could keep in their drawer, like this space that was just this interesting fantasy environment that you could return to and explore and engage with. And I love that. I think that's awesome. And from the sounds of it, from, you know, what you can read about the actual development history of the game, this game was pretty controversial internal to Nintendo. It did great. It sold a bunch of copies, and so, you know, history was rewritten afterwards. But they talk a lot about how the non-linearity was controversial and how hard it was, and how difficult it was to figure out where to go and how to direct yourself. And there were internal forces within Nintendo that were trying to encourage Miyamoto to linearize the game and just make it a sequence of dungeons where there were these hard fighting challenges that you got through and progress through that way, instead of having this, like, you know, open world that you can explore most of from the beginning. And I'm not sure how much of this is my interpretation of these little tidbits of information that you can grab from it, but the way that I like to believe the story went is that, you know, originally in Zelda, you started with the sword right from the beginning, and you were able to fight monsters. But in response to all of this feedback, Miyamoto actually took the sword away from Link so that you start the game with nothing, and you have to go find it. And I thought it was kind of profound in a way, because it really makes it clear that, you know, it's putting the exploration and the adventuring first, and then all of the rest of it secondary. It's making the game kind of tell you what it is right from the very first moment. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's special. I think it's pretty distinct. I love these. So these secrets that you come across, these little dudes who are hanging out in the dungeon for some reason telling you stuff. I guess there's some, like, they're considered to be not very well translated, and if you had the Japanese version of the game, it would all make much more sense. But I kind of like that there's just this crazy dude who lives in the dungeon who just says stuff that, who knows if it's useful, but it mostly seems really, really strange. I like that aesthetic of it. It seems to fit the style of the game well. But yeah, I've always kind of wondered how much Miyamoto cared about the story. He wasn't responsible for the story in this game. That was the other designer on the project, who is known to be sort of the Lord of the Rings aficionado at Nintendo. And so I would be curious to know if Miyamoto was personally particularly invested in the whole sort of, like, save the princess from the evil wizard aspect of the game, because it's just not very prominent. Like, you know, other than that title role that starts at the beginning of the game, I don't think that there's really any particular evidence that Link would even know that there is a princess to go defeat. Like, you know, maybe some people hint about, you know, an evil wizard somewhere, but it's really just about sort of exploring the space and finding all of its secrets. I think it'd be really fun to actually do some hacks like I did back in my youth and modify the game, not just to make it easier, but to maybe make it communicate what I feel like the game is about, like what's important to me about this game, a little more clearly. There's actually you can do a swordless playthrough of the game up to the very last boss battle. Like you can get to the very last dungeon and solve all of its puzzles and go fight Ganon without ever having picked up the sword. But you can't actually defeat Ganon because you need to be able to damage him with the sword in order to get through that battle. And so I want to see if we can make a hacked version of this ROM that actually allows you to play through the entire game without the sword and do a true swordless playthrough. And then when you get to face Ganon, modify it so that that's not something that you need to get through the game. And so I want to actually take out the security screws from the back of the cartridge and rip the ROM onto the computer and pull it up in an emulator and use some of the cool reverse engineering tools that are inside of there to actually modify this thing so that we can do all of that. Maybe we can change some of the text too, make it a little more flavorful. But I think it'd be fun to make the Explorers version, the Adventurers Club version of Hack and Slash. Of Zelda, Legend of Zelda.